Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Duncan Dukin Williams, and I think we'll get started with this session here. It's going to be focused on the Irei Project. And can I just see a show of hands? How many people here have already know something about the Irei, the Book of Names, and have already stamped some? Okay. So almost everybody. With that as background, I'm not going to do some very basic background to the Irei. I'm going to give, hopefully, all of you a little bit of a sense of some things about the Irei Project and especially the Book of Names, like the behind the scenes, and then also talk to you with something specific about Crystal City and some of the challenges related to the names project there. And then more or less make it a time for you to ask me a bunch of any questions you have about the project. But I'll try to, I know we're supposed to go on till 3:15, I think, so it's actually quite a long session. And so obviously I don't want to be just unilaterally, talking that whole time. So I very much prefer if you all could ask questions and I could get into whatever you're interested in. But I want to start today with this photo. It's of a Buddhist funeral at Crystal City, and you can see there's a photo of the, it's a fairly typical camp photo of a funeral. This is not specific to Crystal City. You often find barracks in the background, some clergy in the front row, family members, and then the casket. But you can see on the Japanese there about this fact that this is the Perugumi Ichido. So this is, this one is how you tell this funeral happened at Crystal City and not somewhere else. This is a funeral for one of the Japanese Peruvians. And as you know, tomorrow morning, the Irei Project will be involved, and I'll be in my other my Buddhist robes, officiating a memorial service at the former site of the swimming facility pool area, where two Japanese Peruvian girls unfortunately died drowning in the pool. And so that's the site where we will hold memorial service tomorrow. And what I wanted to kind of get at today is that many of the things that are behind the Irei Project, including the Book of Names, are derived from or inspired by how people did memory work or memorial work back in World War II. So including holding funerals and memorial services here at, well, we're not at the Crystal City site, but if we were here at the Crystal City site. Amongst the priests that are in this photo is Reverend Kenko Yamashita. He was the former abbot of my temple, which is located in Little Tokyo, Los Angeles, called Zenshuji. And he was, this is a photo of him. One is on the Taiyo Maru when he first came to the U.S. in 1938 with his wife. And then there's a different photo of him, upper left-hand, top left-hand corner, when he was in the Santa Fe camp. And he was in a bunch of, he was in Tuna Canyon Detention Center, he was in Lordsburg Army internment camp, and then the Santa Fe internment camp before he finally ended his World War II internment history at Crystal City. And he was somebody who was picked up because he was a Buddhist priest, but also because he was a martial arts instructor, Kendo instructor, and also because he led one of the Japanese language schools in LA area. So those three, like three X's by his name, in terms of like what the authorities, the FBI, were worried about as threats to national security. People who were involved in the martial arts, people who were Buddhist priests, people who were Japanese language school related people. And during his time at at Crystal City. He served as one of the main instructors for at Crystal City they had a kind of U.S. federal, like a English school, and then a Japanese school that followed the Japanese curriculum. So he ran along with Reverend Seitsu Takahashi, who was his colleague across the way in Little Tokyo at the Koyasan Buddhist Temple. The head priest of that temple was the principal of the Crystal City Japanese language school. But anyway, all that to say that that photo we began with Reverend Takahashi is here, Reverend Yamashita is here. These people who wanted to make sure that even if the government at that time was not so interested in memorializing deaths in camp, that somebody remembered those who unfortunately, in a place far from home, passed away. And the word Irei, now I'm going to start to get into this, why our project is called the Irei Project and so forth, is because back in World War II, they would call many of these memorial services Irei Sai. Sai means like a ceremony or service. And Irei, I means to console, and Rei means spirit in Japanese. So a ceremony to console the spirits of those who, passed away. And Irei monuments, the background in Japan, they've always had, not always had, since the Russo-Japanese War. So in the early part of the 20th century, they started doing these Irei-sai or Irei ceremonies and Irei monuments for people who died abroad, like in war, or if you were somebody who in the diaspora, like you went to Manchuria or Peru or United States or Canada, and you died abroad, they would do something called like a special ceremony for those who are far from home, who may be, feeling alone. Let's say you were a sugar plantation worker in Hawaii or something like that. They would do these irei. And in fact, before World War II, there was a Hilo, Hawaii, was the first overseas ireto was built in 1938. But this kind of thing, in terms of actual monuments as opposed to irei-sai or services, started to appear right before World War II for those who died in these kind of unfortunate circumstances. And so our project was somewhat inspired by all of this to say, what if we, in our time, did something to console the spirits of elders and ancestors who experienced this difficult situation of the World War II incarceration. Of course, the project is not just about those who died in camp, even though that's the memory project that they did during World War II. But of course, the history of Japanese American incarceration is also a history of surviving camp, right? So it's kind of trying to bridge the two things. And it's based on Reverend Shinjo Nagatomi, who built the Manzanar Ireto. His theory, I translated his diary from camp, and he writes that when you do a memorial service or when you have a monument called the Ireto or that kind of monument, it's not just to console the spirits of those who passed away, but to console the spirits of those who are left behind, the family members who, they've already lost their homes, their jobs, their career, if they're college student, there's already a loss of having gone to camp. But then if you further lose a loved one in camp days, he was like, the families that are remaining need consolation as well. And so that's the spirit behind the project. And this is a picture of, the famous Anselm photo of the Ireto at Manzanar. And so that's where our project kind of is inspired by this Irei Monument in Manzanar. But as it turns out, there was also one that was built in, the first one, Manzanar one was built in 1943 in time for Obon, which is Japanese Buddhist ceremony or festival to welcome and be with the ancestors. And Japanese tradition says you should do a Buddhist memorial service, you should do different kind of things to invite the spirits of the ancestors to come for a period of time, usually in the summer. Some places in Japan do it in middle of August, and other places do it in middle of July. But in the summer time, the ancestors are supposed to come back for a time. You're supposed to do, in addition to offering food, and you do dances, obon dances, to help welcome them. And then you do these ceremonies to send the spirits back. And so at Manzanar, Reverend Nagatomi wanted to have something to recall people by the time of the 1943 summer Obon festival. And in the Obon ceremony, that's when they dedicated this monument. The Rowa one took a little bit later, but this was also the Irei-hi, which is the same kind of name. Hi just means a structure to console the spirits. This was built in the Rower Cemetery, which still exists today, by the way, if you ever go out to Arkansas. That's one of the few things that remain of that camp. But it's this taller monument that is also, I would call it a hybrid monument. If we go back to the one at Manzanar, this is based on, Reverend Nagatomi talks about the Gorinto, the 5-tier stupa. So in the original sketches of the thing, there's these kind of 5 things that relate to the 5 elements. And I'll come back to this about the Irecho in a moment, the Book of Names. But there are these water, fire, earth, and these 5 elements that these 5 sections of the monument are supposed to represent. But it also looks like a about the 1920s, there was a big fad in American cemeteries around the country of using these Egyptian obelisk shapes, which, of course, like Washington Monument, they actually have a long history in the United States, but average people started to make funerary or memorial tombstones in that kind of Egyptian obelisk shape. So it's a kind of merging of those two cultures. And then the one in Rower, what they did was they built it on, if you look at the bottom concrete, there's these lotus flower motifs on the ground, and it's supposed to be based on, according to Reverend Daitetsu Hayashima, a Jodo Shinshu Buddhist priest. He writes about how the monument is supposed to represent this idea of consoling spirits, but it's supposed to represent a teaching in the Buddhist tradition called the lotus flower that blossoms above muddy water. It's a classical teaching in Buddhist texts, but what it is the muddy water is supposed to represent the world of suffering, and the flower that blossoms above the muddiness is supposed to represent liberation or freedom, awakening, things like that. And so, if you go, then that's why if you go to a typical Buddhist temple, you'll see a Buddha on top of a pedestal that has these lotus flower motifs, and it's built on the same principle, where this. But it's not a flower at the top. It's hard to see it exactly, but it's a globe and an American eagle on top. And that's just the hybrid part of it. But anyway, it's supposed to represent this idea, this monument, that through or even because of suffering, you can actually find freedom. And the way they actually incorporated that idea into the monument was Reverend Hayashima and some others, I guess slightly illegally, they cut some barbed wire from the fence line and then also took away some of the rebar and used it to install in the middle of the Irei structure at Rower. And his concept was the very things that are taking away our freedom, like imprisoning us, can be the things, the muddy water that blossoms up. Just like if you have a lotus flower in pure water or sterile water, it won't actually grow. You need the mud of the water to give it the nutrients for it to rise up. And so freedom or liberation comes from going through different difficulties, and that those don't have to forever imprison you, but can be the very things that can, if you reframe it right, help you to come to freedom. And so this is a very, I think, profound idea of how to think about monuments to the World War II incarceration that the people in the camps themselves came up with. So we're very much inspired by this type of thing. And you can see in the last one, this is also built in right before they closed down the camp. You can see it in the English text there in the stone monument. It says September 1945. As the camp was closing down in Amachi in Colorado, one of the other WRA camps that have these extant Irei monuments, you can see that they were very interested in building, again, a monument to console the spirits of those who passed away. But here on the explanatory board, the wooden board still exists. It's at the Japanese American National Museum in Los Angeles. But you can see, if you read the Japanese, that they not only accounted for those who died in camp at Amachi, but also those who volunteered for the 442nd Regimental Combat Team and the Military Intelligence Service, who were, they had left their family members, their siblings, their parents in Amachi in Colorado and went abroad and fought on behalf of the United States and lost their lives. And they wanted to honor those people, and they made a particular point of putting, the names on that monument. And this was done, you can see in this photo, by Reverend Masahiko Wada, who is a Baptist pastor. And so all three of these monuments were built by either Buddhist priests or a Christian pastor, like a clergy, to deal with the kind of the spiritual kind of consolation or spiritual way of approaching memory work. And so our project is very much, as I think I've already said this phrase before, to console the spirits of those who've gone before, but also those who remain. So this idea that in the subsequent generations, there are impacts that need to be healed or consoled. And so that's why our project, when we first came up with this idea of we've been working really hard in the archives to compile the names of every single person of Japanese ancestry who experienced the World War II incarceration. Now what do we do? And our idea of putting all of these names in the form of a book monument. Our creative director, Sun Young Lee, is a publisher, and so she was very interested in this idea of a book monument. And we also kind of drew on the Buddhist tradition of a kakocho. Like at my temple, up on the altar on the right-hand side, we always have a special place for kako in Japanese just means past, a book of the past. Cho means book or registry. So we have the names of all the temple members who've died at our temple from the founding. So since our temple, we just celebrated our centennial 2 years ago, so it's a 102 years old temple. A lot of people's names are in this book of names. And whenever we have a monthly memorial ceremony called Shotsuki Hoyo, it's a monthly service, we chant the names of what are we on? October. So we chant all the names of the temple members who died in the month of October. And so it can be people from 100 years ago, it can be people, from last year. But we say the names, right? And so that was one concept of that came from our kind of cultural traditions. And then the other concept, okay, well, we've got the book of names. We're going to put it in this form of we remember the past. We say people's names. People's names are important because as we recognize them with stamping or we say their names, it's a way of bringing the absent or those who kind of like we activate it by, we call it Nembutsu in the Buddhist tradition, but sometimes when we say the name of the Buddha's already passed away, but we say the name so that we can feel the Buddha's presence by so doing. And in the same way, our thought was like, if we can do some action, like stamping, or tomorrow we'll be reciting names, but then somehow we bring their presence back into the present moment. And so that was one kind of cultural tradition we drew on in the making of the book. And the other one, in terms of how we designed the book, for those of you who've already stamped, not everyone may have done this, but as long as we're not in a rush, we usually invite you to come and touch that. There's a ceramic tile piece, one in the beginning of the book and one at the end of the book. And let's see, if you can, like that. The beginning one is kind of that gray color, and the one at the back of the book is this kind of more brownish, orangish color. But we invite you to touch it. And what we say is that when you touch that ceramic piece, it's a way to ground yourself to the history and connect to 75 different sites around the country that we had camp survivors, and in some cases when we didn't have a camp survivor, a descendant, go back to the site that they had been incarcerated in, and they collected a little bit of soil, either gave it to me personally or mailed it in. And I took a little bit of soil from each of those 75 different Department of Justice, Army internment camps, the WCCA assembly centers, and the 10 WRA camps, and had our ceramicist, John Hasegawa, infuse some clay with it to make these tiles that kind of frame all of those names. And we invite you to touch that. And it's a little bit based on this concept in Japan of soil and pilgrimage. You may know that in Japan we have, the 33 Kannon pilgrimage in Saikoku area, or in Shikoku Island we have the famous 88 temple pilgrimage, where you're supposed to, over time, go to all 88 temples, but everyone knows that it's hard to take up enough time to walk to all 88 temples. So now we have buses, and you can go by your personal car and stuff like that. But also, if you really don't have time, you can just go to Zentsuji, which is one of the main 88 temples, and there's a site inside of Zentsuji where they have collected, it's like a little underground cave tunnel thing that you circumambulate, and you pass the soil that's been collected from all 88 temples, and you kind of encounter that as a way to, as if you had visited all 88 temples. And so that was our theory with the soil when we designed it for the Irecho, was we were like, let's, especially there are people who've been like 100 years old, 102 years old, like elders who we know they're not going to have a chance to go on pilgrimage to all of these places. But if they can touch that piece of ceramic tile, that it would be a way to, in some sense, connect to this national story of incarceration. So that's the design bit. And then I'm going to now just say a few words about the compilation bit, about the idea behind the project of names, and how we have a kind of open kind of idea about what a monument is. That sometimes we think of monuments, if you think of like 9/11 Memorial or Lynching Memorial in Alabama, or Vietnam War Memorial in Washington, D.C., we tend to think like the names and memorials get their value by how permanent it is, like you etch it into granite stone, or how big it is. But we came up with this concept, like, what if we use the Buddhist principle of impermanence or dynamic change as actually giving value to the monument, and that it was also a very practical thing of and intimacy. Like it's not about how big it is. It's actually quite, when you do the stamping, in a way we wanted to engender the idea that it's about connecting, or intimate kind of way of touching a monument by stamping, but also this idea that it doesn't need to be big, it doesn't need to be permanent to gain its value. And in fact, it's the impermanence, it's the dynamic change. Every day, this morning we already had lots of people come in and stamp the book. And so with every stamp, the book is, changing. But that's actually what's giving it value. Every stamp is adding another acknowledgement, another remembrance of a family member or a friend. And so our project had this idea that, yes, we're going to do our best before we go to press, that we'll try to get to like 99% accuracy before we, call it and say we're going to print. And so we called it at what we thought was about 99%. We knew that we would still be wrong. We're missing some people. Somebody's uncle, George's middle name is going to be wrong. But that was going to be okay, and that we wanted to invite people to come, family members, to let us know. Auntie so-and-so's first name should be spelled Yoshie instead of this way instead of that way. That would be part of the dynamic change that is actually doing the repair work of the historical record and healing of this history. And so, we used the Crystal, like here in Crystal City, we used the Japanese language, internally created directories. We used the government camp rosters, which are pictures in time, unlike the War Relocation Authority camps that had, at the close of camp, those final accountability rosters that purported to account for everybody. Crystal City doesn't have one of those. Fort Lincoln doesn't have one of those. Lordsburg, Santa Fe, all the DOJ camps do not have these final rosters. So we get these time-stamped rosters. So we have to pile up a lot of these, sometimes take personal documents, sometimes find government documents, as well as train transfer lists and DOJ internee index cards, and all of these things, and kind of layer and layer and layer and layer until we feel 99% confident that we've made sure nobody's left out and everybody's name is spelled accurately. So the next thing, I'm just going to start to conclude my remarks before opening it up, but I wanted to kind of conclude with what are we doing here and where we're going. So obviously tomorrow there's a ceremony where we're going to remember the 25 persons of Japanese ancestry who passed away at Crystal City. We're also going to say the names of 8 German persons of German ancestry who died at Crystal City, and have camp survivors stamp the 25 names of people who are in the book of names, just to make sure that nobody's left out, and that especially those who passed away have at least one stamp or mark of acknowledgement. And so that's our goal, to get to a point where every single one of the 125,284 names, plus we've had several hundreds of names that we've added since September 2022 in what we call the appendix section. So we have these extra pages that we've specially printed of people who somehow we missed in the early printing, and now we're constantly revising and updating. And so to make sure that every name is stamped, and as of last December at the Japanese American National Museum, we were able to get 81,485 of the 125,000 names stamped, so about not quite 2/3, but there. And back in February, we began a big national tour. Starting in Washington, D.C. on the Day of Remembrance in conjunction with the National Archives and the Smithsonian, where we had the copy of the Executive Order 9066 come out next to this book of names. And we kicked off a national tour and campaign to get to the goal of all people being stamped at least once. And so we've been at Manzanar, we've been at Hard Mountain, Hard Mountain, Minidoka, like a lot of different places, and we're here on the pilgrimage, and we'll be also in the next month at the pilgrimages in Poston and Gila River, Arizona, and we'll also be in New York City and Philadelphia and Chicago and so on and so forth. But we're on this big national tour to get to that goal. And so we really appreciate anyone who's also participating in the stamping at this stop, because that's our only way that we can get to the goal. Maybe the last thing I'll say is that we also have, in addition to the Book of Names, our project has these two other elements that we're working on. One is the online archive called the Ireizo, and probably many of you have already, if you did stamping, you may have gone to our website to just look up your birth or stuff like, sometimes we ask you, if possible, to tell us ahead of time which names you'd like to stamp, family members, and so on, but also their dates of birth and stuff like that. So that's what's on the Ireizo. It has not only date of birth, but all the camps that they had been incarcerated in. So that's not included, obviously, in the Book of Names. It's just the name. But this is a website to, in some sense, learn about more of the person behind the name. And so all of this information about the World War II incarceration, which camps. But we've also have a collaboration with an organization called Densho, based in Seattle, that has an amazing repository. It's called the DDR, the Densho Digital Repository, an archive of oral histories, of photographs from World War II, of many of the people that are in the Ireicho and this project. And so we have a collaboration with them so that you can click this button on somebody's plaque in our website. The plaque will turn it over, and photographs and oral histories from Densho, if they exist, if photographs of that person from camp exist, you'll then be able to see it and see the face behind the name, as it were. And we also have this way of engaging with the online monument, because that's another challenge, right? Okay, book monument, it's an odd kind of form of a monument, and websites are also a rather odd way to have a monument. But we were like, how can we create something that isn't just like a database or like people and numbers and stuff like that? And so our concept was a sonic monument, and especially people who couldn't even come because of their age or distance, or there also people who are at Crystal City who repatriated to Japan. I've met and interviewed quite a few people in Japan who are descendants of people of Crystal City who they returned on the exchange and they never came back to the United States. And for those people, they may not be able to come to a pilgrimage like this or come to one of our stops. So it's a way to be able to engage. We call it a sonic monument, but there's another button, and all of you are welcome to participate in it. But you click the button, you can basically just record you saying the name of this individual and submit it. And you can also first listen to it to make sure you did it. Okay, it's the way you want it to sound, and you can redo it if you want to. But then once you submit it, then we review it, and then it becomes live. And then, especially if multiple people do it, you'll hear several different people. Let's say all the cousins want to honor, Auntie so and so. Then you'll hear all your cousins, saying that name. So that's something that we're doing that we feel is a little bit of a different way to think about monuments. And finally, we're doing these sculptural installations, creating kind of meditative spaces of reflection, of memory, and healing at the different confinement sites. And we're focused right now, just because, as you probably all know, the MPS sites are very complex places to work with right now, with the Federal National Park Service kind of experiencing a lot of different challenges. So right now it's not the best time to do it there. So we're working right now with Poston, with in Arizona, and Heart Mountain in Wyoming, and with Rower in Arkansas, which are run by private foundations or cities or tribal councils, and so and descendant groups. But what we're trying to build there are a different kind of monument, same kind of philosophy that it's the interactivity that matters, that your presence, your action matters. That kind of idea is at the heart of all the monument building projects we're doing. But the ones we're building involve some form of interaction. So I'm not permitted to give a lot of detail yet because we haven't shown publicly any designs or whatever. But roughly, let's say, just to give you some sense of it, one thing is going to involve a bell, right? And we're in the striker of the bell, we'll have the names inside of the striker so that when you ring the bell, it'll resonate. And it's as if you're symbolically, all of the people who were at that camp are kind of activated by your ritual action. Or we'll have these other vessels, they're like prayer wheels, but you turn them, and we're thinking of working with some native artists to get beads into there. I won't say the name of camp, but anyway, roughly 14,000 people were there. And so we'll have 14,000 beads, symbolically in this thing that you turn, and it'll make a sound that also activates the spirits of all of those people. And so that kind of art installation is another part of what our project is involved with, of making something that honors these World War II monument makers, like Reverend Nagatomi or Reverend Hayashi or Reverend Wada in the three camps that still have these extant Irei monuments. And so with that, maybe I'll just close and open it up for any questions or feedback, or we have quite a bit of time, I think a good 45 minutes. So we don't have to go to the end, but feel free to ask some questions. Thank you. Yes. Oh, wait. Who had a question first? Oh, yeah.
So memorialization can have many purposes, and my sense for this memorialization project is that it's very much about serving the community, the descendants, the people who themselves were in this camp. I was wondering if there are projects that you have undertaken or that you're hoping to undertake that have the separate purpose of educating the general public. Like, I only learned about Irei once I started doing the Alien Enemies Act work.
Yeah.
I'm not a member of the Japanese American community, and I came to it by way of connecting with so many members of the Japanese American community. It's not the kind of thing that I would have come across walking on the National Mall.
Right.
And so just wondering if you thought about how the country does or doesn't, really frankly fails to commemorate the Alien Enemies Act history and teach that history. So is there an intervention here?
Yeah, I think for our project, you're probably right that at the heart of it, we wanted to do something as a kind of repair project and a healing that's the tradition. So we recognize that idea of Reverend Nagatomi, like the impact of what happened during World War II has these resonances that go through almost generations, and that it's this generation, our turn to do something there's redress, and there's lots of different ways to go about things, but this was, we felt, a way to bring families that have a particular connection to this history. That's at the heart of it. But the way we have the stamping process, we always actually really emphasize the idea that this is for the broadest possible American public, because we always have two parts of the stamping, right? The first stamp is for the next name in the sequence of names that hasn't yet been stamped. There are people that died in camp, people never got married, they don't have any descendants to come and stamp for them. So we need everybody's help to come and do that. it's only after you do that first stamp, then we turn the pages to the 6 or whatever names you submitted of family members and so on. So we've always conceived of this project as requiring the broadest possible American participation. And so we've had a group of African American, pastors come and stamp. We've had, we were in Fort Lincoln the other day, and we had Native American elders and tribal leaders come and stamp the names. And so we always try to make it as open as possible by that first stamp of making it an American project writ large. But of course, at the heart of it, we also have this other part of it that is about community engagement and that kind of thing of Japanese American people who have a connection. But even Japanese Americans, 2020 census says there are 1.4 million Japanese Americans, and the majority of Japanese Americans have no connection to this history, right? So that's a fact that sometimes people forget, is of the 1.4 million people that came after the war, people who were in Hawaii at the time of the war, like their descendants are not connected to this history, and yet we want to have a circle of Japanese Americans, and then, as I said, enlarge the circle to all Americans to participate in this history. And it's something where the kind of thing you're doing or other organizations are probably much more capable of doing the real work of education. But we've always felt like, okay, there's preservation work, education work, that lots of good organizations are already doing about the World War II. And if there is something that this project can do towards that end, great. But we're also trying to fill that gap of like, beyond just educating people, there's something very, I think, spiritual or deep about repairing. Because I'm Buddhist, I tend to call it the racial karma of America, that isn't just handled by pieces of legislation or setting up exhibits at museums. I do all those things too, but there's something else that is a deeper healing that needs to get done, and repair work that needs to get done. So that's the way our project has been oriented, but we're very much in conversation and alliance with everybody else doing all the other amazing work that different groups do about Japanese American World War II history. Okay, I feel like I saw Erin's hand first, and then Ann. Yeah.
So I'm just curious to know how you're thinking about these separate designs and monuments for each WRA camp that sort of came after the conception of the book, right?
Yeah.
I'm just curious if you could tell us more about, I know you're probably, I think you're working with like a designer for that?
Yeah.
I wish you could say more about sort of how you're drawing on all of your experiences and creating ceremony and memorial and making a different one for each of them.
Yeah. So my wife, Sonia, so she's a creative director. I have zero creative bone, like I'm not that creative, but she's working with lots of artists, designers, and people of different backgrounds, to sound artists, and because a lot of it is about resonance, and we're hoping for Heart Mountain, for example, to work with some people that work in the kind of native beading tradition. And so anyway, we're working with lots of different people, and it's been a very creative and fun process of trying to create something that's suitable. She's almost thinking about it as land art, and something that's taking the land into account. And that's why we work so much with a lot of native artists and other people. But the topography of place and finding the right place for placing the monument has been one of the big challenge one, right? Is you want to create something that's not like, okay, we plopped a monument there and it looks out of place, or disrupts the landscape view, or, so we're trying to blend in, but do something generative. And so sometimes we call it perspective and refuge, but the purpose of these installations is to, number one, let you kind of like reflect on, see something that you wouldn't otherwise. Because a lot of these places, they do have interpretive centers, and they do already have like honor roll, like they have different things going on. But we want to do something where the making of this is going to give you a vantage point or a perspective that you wouldn't have otherwise, and have a moment to reflect. It's kind of meditative, like to reflect on the place, the land, and sometimes the layered histories that exist there. So often, like Japanese American World War II is those several years, but the land tells you a longer history. And so we're trying to get people to see that, and our monument, the ritual action is meant to invoke that. And then we'll have benches and other things suitably created in a design, a designed way that creates that kind of almost like a meditative, reflective space, so that whether it's you've seen the exhibitions, you've seen, learned about the history and all these other things, but a lot of times with going to a place like having this is the refuge part, like somewhere like Poston, like even now, but certainly in the summer, it's so hot. Having a shade refuge of some kind is very, I think, critical or something that could be provided that they used to have back in Poston 1, those shade tracks between the elementary school and stuff like that. So we're also trying to draw again on like how did people back then do it to survive camp, but how do we draw on that, be inspired by that to create a site-specific installation or monument that'll give that extra perspective, give that reflective space, and something of a refuge. And maybe the last thing that's underlying it is we're interested in connectivity, right? So that perspective is going to give you that connection between present and past, but also Japanese American history and something else, or even just yourself and the mountain, or it's to generate that idea of we are all this history is connected, and so it's very challenging, but please talk to Sonia, because I know she would benefit a lot from all of the work you've done too. And as I said, it's just a big, huge sieve of lots of different ideas being tested, and the art director, so Sonia is very hard person to work. Like I'm her husband, so I can say that she's not that easy to work with, and so a lot of our artists and designers have difficulty. But in the end, things get refined and really clear as to how we do things very intentionally. So that was often even with the making of the book, the poor book designers and what they had to go through for the layout of the book, or embedding that ceramic tile piece. Like there's lots of different things. Or when we went to display it at Janum, she had such demanding things of Clement Hanami, like the poor people at Janum, that she's like, this blue wall color is wrong, or the height of the soil has to be here, not here, and this much. There's a lot of things that go into it, and I don't pay that much attention to those type of design, the creative thing, but they all matter, I think, and so that's what we're all kind of like working very intentionally, creatively, and collaboratively with lots of different people with strong opinions and ideas, all getting through this thing of the art director trying to nail it down. Does that give you a sense of what's going on? Yeah. Somewhere over here, yeah.
No, it's just pointing.
Oh, okay, we can see.
So I have two questions for you.
One is straightforward historical. I wondered what precedent is there for contemporary memorials that use that same idea of like imprinting like a bell or a prayer wheel with the names of victims or people who were there. And then also, so I know about this project for a while, right? And I've always thought about the soil from the different camps, which I love that idea of embedding it within the book. I've always thought about that as a way to tie the people in the book together.
Yeah.
But I guess, do you also see it just as much as like a pilgrimage for the people who are encountering the book?
Right. Yes. So let me start.
One of those like the priorities?
I think probably because of that photo I showed about that idea of, right now the book itself is going on pilgrimage, right? But also when people come to the book, it's a kind of pilgrimage. That idea, I think, was at the heart of the soil project, but also asking the camp survivors to go and collect the soil is their pilgrimage. So pilgrimage was the central concept behind that. What we did in terms of tying everyone together, and I think this is one of the things that some people are quite surprised by how big the book is and how many people there were, and the way we sequenced the names, we did it by date of birth. It had first to do with, it was impractical to do it alphabetically because there's certain, Mary Hayashi, George Yamamoto, there's certain names that are so common that you'd have 152 George Yamamotos and you wouldn't know which one's which if you didn't have a different sequencing strategy. So we did that, but then what happened then is people who are not related by family are next to each other. And this was something about how this National Monument Project is about tying this from whichever camp you're in, not just this particular camp or not just this particular barrack or whatever. It's all connected as one big experience. And we try to use that 5-line Gorinto, the 5-part thing. Our font designer, a guy called Burton Hasebe, he's the only Asian American, I think, in the last couple of years there's some list of like graphic design or font design, like I can't remember which one. There's some like top 100 whatever designers or whatever. I think the only Asian American on there. But Burton made that glyph for us, like that symbol for us, and it did two things. One was that reflection of the 5 elements reflected in the Manzanar Ireto, but also he and Sanyang were really interested in this idea of the Camp 442 and other, like the people that made those senninbari, these 1,000-person stitched belts, and different people made the different stitches. Usually the mother of the soldier would start it, but other people in the community would add one stitch, until you had 1,000 stitches on this little band that those that served would take with them into combat as a kind of prayer or protection. And anyway, if you look at those lines in the Irecho book, it's also meant to be this idea of this is the stitching together of this bigger community, and those red dots on the senninbari is now the 5 lines in the book, that kind of idea. So does that answer that part of the question? And then let me go back to, well, wait, your first question was about the
like prayer wheels.
yeah. Oh, precedents?
Other memorials.
Yeah, I have tried to study. Like I went to like almost from Amsterdam to Milan to obviously other parts of Europe, like Holocaust memorials and World War I memorials, World War II memorials, or in the United States, like names memorials, like lynching memorial in Alabama, like lots of different memorials. Maybe the one that comes closest to our concept is the wind one, the tower. So the one in, why am I forgetting? Is it Virginia, or like, so when the 9/11, so there's a 9/11 memorial in New York, obviously, but the United Airlines plane that got shot, yeah, in the field. So that tower memorial for those on that United flight, that 9/11 memorial, it requires the interactivity of the wind that goes into these chimes, then creates the resonances, that then creates this reflective mood. And I learned about that way after we started, but I was like, that's a similar kind of concept of creating a kind of reflective space using interactivity. Of course, this is of the natural elements like wind to create the kind of atmosphere suitable for memorialization and monument for those who died in a tragic situation. But ours is, it's kind of like, it involves the human person actually ritually changing the monument to activate it. And so I haven't personally, I just haven't.
It's just your pure investment.
No, it's not pure, but it's just it comes out of that basic idea of interactivity and the need for the present to inform the past. You know, that.
Part of it is obviously
Yeah.
it almost seems obvious thinking about it after the fact of combining this, but like we're just practicing.
Right. So just like the stamping in the book changes the book every time, and every time you stamp, and you kind of see the other stamps in there, so you see like, oh, other people have come to honor people too. It's this layering process, and so, for example, with the prayer wheel, we're going to, it's nice to move it and have some kind of sound emanate, so that you feel like but we're going to make it out of a certain kind of like a certain kind of material where the patina, or like everyone's touching of it, is actually going to change the material surface of it, so that the more you touch it, the more people come to the monument and turn the wheel. You can kind of see the history of the monument makers, which are the people of today, itself. And so I think that's the theory behind what we're trying to do. Yes.
I have a question and a shameless plug. So I was wondering, like, obviously we can, sign up to stamp the book and we can record names. And I was wondering if there's any other opportunities to get involved and engaged, especially with like the sculptural installations projects, like any more opportunities to support this work.
Yeah, Miko Yoshida is here. He's on our board, and I'm here, and the other people who are at the Irei stamping. So any of us, please just approach us, and we are always open to good ideas. You'll have to pass the creative director's test, but good ideas always win. And so anything you can suggest to us, it's I've been on this. We're volunteer, like this comes from the heart, and so we always just welcome anything that'll help to refine and enhance and make better our project.
Can I talk really quick about a project that
Yeah,
I'm just
please.
realizing right now that is kind of a monument? So I'm a quilter and a textile artist as a hobbyist. And it's a big part of what I consider, like, the reason I do it is also like a direct legacy of incarceration, because my grandmother was a textile artist, and I feel like, she came into camp when she was 16 and she had all this time. Like, otherwise she would have been in school and working on the farm, So I heard a few years ago about Satsuki Ina's mother's quilt. She's a close Quaker quilt that was gifted to her. It was given, she was at Tantran, and the Quakers came and tossed this quilt over the wall, over the fence for her. And I saw this online, and I was like, oh no, I have to make this quilt, don't I? And so I'm working on it. It's all hand sewn, like the original one was, but I would love to help get more people to help me make these blocks, because I think we need like 63 of them. So if you're interested in learning how to do this, it is all hand sewing. I could send you kits tagged to it, and I can teach people like online, is my plan. And if you want to come talk to me, sign up, get your email address, and I will follow up with you and have you contribute. So if these are a few of the blocks, they're not complete, they're on the circle, but.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it's like the more projects there are that are both creative and require like lots of people's involvement, the hearts are all kind of coming together to do something. So thank you for the sharing that. Yes.
So you're a really talented writer and researcher and teacher too. Do you have time to do any new work outside of this?
Well, I'm trying in the very few moments I have that isn't doing more research on. Right now, I'm stuck on the Japanese Foreign Ministry files on the first Scripps Home exchange ship and looking through the Japan side documents that list each passenger on the Scripps Home that was repatriated in June 42. It's these early people that sometimes are missing from our Irei Project because they never entered one of the big Department of Justice camps or didn't enter a WRA camp. And so I'm researching these documents, it'd be like, and there were lots of also, it's not just Japanese Peruvians, like Japanese Ecuadorians and Japanese Panamanians. There's lots of people like that we need to make sure are not left out. So I'm working on that, and all the things related to this Irei project in that way. But there have been people who said we need to find a way to write up something about the making of the Irecho and these other art installations and whatever, and before you forget, maybe it's good to write it down or do something to document it. And so that's one bit. I'm trying to make sure to devote a little bit of time to document. And then just as a completely other thing, I'm trying to write a book about Buddhism, like just a primer. Like a lot of people come up to me and, they're like, if I'm new to Buddhism, what's the one book you could recommend? And I'm like, I can't recommend, so I'm like, I better write a book that I feel good to recommend. And so that's a different project, but yeah. Anything else? Are we good? Well, tomorrow is a big day at the site, and I hope we can all, you're all going to be involved too. I'm going to make everybody interact a little bit. We'll have the camp survivors come up and stamp the names of the 25 individuals who died in camp. But all of you are going to be, I'll invite you up to place it's like a one-stem flower to the kind of altar. It's just a table, but we'll call it an altar and ask you to do that to honor the 2 girls who died at the swimming pool, but all of the others as well who died at Crystal City. So really appreciate your participation in that, and just really appreciate all of you for participating in the Irecho stamping or the online sonic voicing refuge monument. These monument projects don't work if you don't have people that respond, and you've been amazingly responsive. And let me just end maybe with 2 different things that have struck me along the way of this project as to why it has the potential to be meaningful. Number one is something where we had a camp survivor. She was like 98 or something, like quite elderly. And she saw her name in the book and didn't want to stamp it. She felt awkward stamping her own name. But she came not only with her kids and grandkids, but with a 5-year-old great-grandkid and had him put the stamp on her name. And I was like, oh, maybe there's value in creating like opportunity for family members to get together and maybe even tell story or transmit to younger generations. So maybe that goes to that question of education, even just within a family, is you create an opportunity like that. So that's one thing that, this is like 100 anecdotes I could tell. And the other one actually was at last year's Crystal City pilgrimage. It was 2 years ago? 2 years ago. So we had just begun the project at the museum in LA. And this one gentleman, he's not here this year, but he came up to me and it was at it was a different hotel, wasn't it? It was in one of these kind of rooms. And he came up to me and he said, I came to the Crystal City pilgrimage because, my family has this connection here. Oh, no, sorry. My family doesn't have a connection. He was a camp survivor, but he was in different, I think, Poston or something. But his wife's family was here. And he wanted to come to the pilgrimage because, unfortunately, his wife, 2 weeks, the previous year had passed away. And he talked about how he was one of the first people to come and stamp at the museum. And his appointment to do the stamping was 2 weeks after his wife passed away. And he told me he wanted to keep that appointment to do the stamping. And he also wanted to keep this pledge to come to Crystal City the following, pilgrimage season, because just as a way to honor his wife. And he told me something about, I know the rules are we're allowed to stamp, and the only time we're supposed to touch the irecho is on that ceramic tile piece, and we're not really supposed to, other than the stamping, touch it. But he said, I saw my wife's name, and I just couldn't help myself. I just leant down and kissed her name. And he was then very apologetic, like I broke the rule. I'm like, it's okay. It's okay because that kiss of his wife, that is now seeped into the irecho. And every single touch, whether it's a stamp or something else, I had somebody else tell me, very upset, the museum staff telling me they were worried because there was water on one of the pages, and is somebody crying over seeing somebody's name. And I was like, it's okay. This is a resilient monument. And in fact, that tear or that kiss is actually giving something, infusing something very special to the monument. And so I just mentioned those two stories, and also thank all of you for participating in this thing, because that's what's giving this monument power and activating it. And so, on behalf of all of the Irei Project team, just wanted to thank you for that. And thank you for coming to this workshop as well. All right, take care. I'll see you tomorrow.